This is episode number 8 and part 1 with Clyde Kusatsu. Coming up.
It was not immediate. I mean, I had to work to be accepted. I had to work to be noticed. It was like one of the first guys to just look at me and says, I'm welcomed and accepted, and you're a good actor. There's this guy coming up to me and he's going, hello, Clyde, you're very funny, the dailies are great. And it's George Harrison, looking at auditions and meetings not as warfare, but as an opportunity to demonstrate your skill set and what you can do, not about booking it. You know, I don't think that camera's going to be on me, it's going to be on him, because he had such a presence that he didn't need all that dialogue.
Hey there, thank you so much for checking out this podcast. Are you a subscriber yet? If not, click that subscribe button so that you do not miss anything ahead. And if you have an extra moment, go ahead and rate and review the show in iTunes or wherever you find podcasts. That will help others find out about the show. I appreciate all your comments and thank you so much for doing that. Hello and welcome to The Working Actor's Journey. My name is Nathan Agan, and this podcast is in-depth interviews with working actors, people who have been doing this and getting paid for it professionally for 30, 40, 50 plus years. It is about finding out what took them from A to B. How did they get started? How do they actually work on material? What challenged them? What did they face early on in their career? What do they still get challenged by? And what have they learned from a lifetime of acting? That's what the goal and the purpose of this show is, and so I'm glad you are here. Now, a quick word about me, your host. Again, my name is Nathan Agan. I'm an actor. I studied theater at the University of Southern California, done a lot of theater, a little bit of TV and film. I'm also an entrepreneur, work for myself online. I'm a bit of a goofball, which maybe you'll hear on this show. And I'm also a bit of a Shakespeare nerd, love studying it, reading it, performing it whenever I get the opportunity. Just so you know, there's going to be about 10 episodes for the first season of this podcast. As a listener of the Working Actor's Journey podcast, Audible is offering you a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to check them out. You can get a book that's an hour long or 15 hours long. Doesn't matter. Whatever you pick, it's free. To download your free audiobook today, go to workingactorsjourney.com/audible. I do have a recommendation with a fantastic narrator. If you want to hear an actor who is exceptional at this stuff, check this book out. Patient Zero by Jonathan Mayberry, read by Ray Porter. Ray is one of the greats, and he's been named Audible's Narrator of the Year. Now, don't get thrown by the cover. It's not a typical zombie book, which is not my kind of genre. It was the reviews that sold me. I mean, people really enjoyed the story, but thought that Ray was the true hero of this one. I mean, they loved him so much. Some people wished they could give him more than 5 stars. And when I started listening to this book, I honestly had to remind myself several times that it's just him reading the books and not a dozen different actors. He's that good. And I've been lucky enough to work with Ray on stage, and I know what a great talent he is. So here's actually a clip from Patient Zero, read by Ray Porter.
Chapter 1. When you have to kill the same terrorist twice in 1 week, then there's either something wrong with your skills or something wrong with your world. And there's nothing wrong with my skills. They came for me at the beach. Nice and slick, 2 in front, 1 big cover man behind in a 3-point close while I was reaching for my car door. Nothing flashy, just 3 big guys in off-the-rack gray, all of them sweating in the Ocean City heat. The point man held up his hands in a no-problem gesture. It was a hot Saturday morning, and I was in swim trunks and a Hawaiian shirt with mermaids on it over a Tom Petty t-shirt, flip-flops and wayfarers. My piece was in a locked toolbox in the trunk with a trigger guard clamped on it.
So you can choose this book, which clocks in at 14 plus hours, and for me, flew by, or choose any of the endless options that Audible offers. Could be a book, a newspaper, a magazine, or even a class. It is that easy. To download your free audiobook today, go to workingactorsjourney.com/audible. Again, that's workingactorsjourney.com/audible for your free audiobook and 30-day trial. Today on the show is part one of the marathon chat I had with Clyde Kusatsu. Clyde is an actor who, as of this month, February 2018, has been working in front of the camera for 45 years, and he is still booking roles. Now, heads up that this is a wide-ranging conversation across the years, and Clyde is a master storyteller with lots of great anecdotes and lessons learned. He can easily weave in history or politics. He's just quite a remarkable person, and I'm thrilled to have him on the show. I first connected with Clyde back in 2008 when I was helping out Ned Vaughn and Unite for Strength in the pre-merger days of SAG-AFTRA. Clyde and I actually lived near each other in LA, and we've kept in touch a bit over the years. Clyde grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, and attended Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois as a theater major. He has over 300 credits on IMDb, and just like Robert Pine in episode number 1, Clyde has been on almost every iconic TV show from the 1970s to today, including both the original and newer versions of Hawaii Five-0. A quick look at his films include Midway, Turner and Hooch, In the Line of Fire, Paradise Road, American Pie, and Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay. He's also done an extensive amount of animated and voiceover roles. Fun facts, according to IMDb, he has played a judge in at least 14 different shows and a medical doctor in at least 24 different movies and shows. He's been very involved with SAG-AFTRA leadership, and in 2013, he became the first elected president of the newly merged union's Los Angeles Local. He currently sits as the National Vice President Los Angeles for SAG-AFTRA. In today's episode, we talk about growing up in post-World War II Hawaii, doing summer stock with Howard Keel, being a college working actor, his time with the East-West Players Theater Company in Los Angeles, how he approaches auditions, and working with the legendary actor Toshiro Mifune. As I mentioned, this is only part one of our conversation. There is more to come. So here we go with episode number 8. Please enjoy part one of my chat with Clyde Kusatsu.
He's even got a show on Vice Network. What Would Diplo Do? That James Vanderbeek, it plays Diplo.
Oh, wow.
And that Bobby Lee plays him.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's like, it's like this business is a wonder,
Yeah.
What's going to happen? You never
cool.
know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to jump off that, I mean, I want to take it back to the beginning of your story, because I'm sure there was a lot that you never expected was going to happen. But you grew up in Honolulu, and
correct.
What kind of work did your parents do?
I was born in 1948. That was just maybe 3 years after the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mother was a elementary school teacher. She was a third grade teacher for her whole career. She was so beloved. Every year she got more presents from her pupils than us. And then my father was a insurance salesman for Occidental Life Insurance Company, which was one of the first insurance companies that was formed by a Japanese-American fella in Hawaii at the time, and that was a breakthrough. He was founded by a guy named L.T. Kagawa, and so Occidental has always, at that time, was always on the forefront of recruiting before there was even a thing called diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so my father was a insurance salesman for his career. He was a veteran of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team It was a Japanese American regiment that was formed following after Pearl Harbor, and where they fought in Europe. They became the most decorated military unit for its size in U.S. military history. They helped break prejudicial viewpoints on the Japanese because, for many people, the Japanese were the enemy because of Pearl Harbor.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, but I tell you, I can still remember growing up in the 50s where that residual feeling and antipathy was still around.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it was there. Growing up, and at that time, when I was a kid, there was like only one TV station called KGMB, and they were the CBS affiliate. And then as licenses got bought, then NBC came in, and then ABC came in. So to program, they just filled the air morning to night with like movies from the Warner Brothers Film Library, or Columbia Film Library, Universal Film Library. So in a sense, I guess I was a child of the media. I loved movies as a kid. It was, maybe I didn't feel like I wanted to be part of the status quo. There's got to be something like the song in West Side Story. There's got to be something better than this.
Sure.
And then, so in a way, I grew up watching Mickey and Judy make a show in the barn and hammer a stage together. And I thought, wow, that would be kind of nice to do. And watching the Little Rascals and how they put on a show, and then of course the Mickey Mouse Club, and all those kids were multi-talented, dance, sing, perform, act, and everything. And it was like very attractive and sort of like inspiring in a way. And I remember saying to my folks, could I take tap dance lessons? And they kind of paused and looked at me kind of askew, going, yeah, they sort of ignored it, And so I went to Iolani Prep School, which was an Episcopal boys' school at the time. It's now co-ed, but at the time it was the rival to Punahou, which was started by the missionaries in 1841. Our Iolani was started in 1863, I believe. At the time, Barack Obama is a graduate of Punahou. And when I was at school at Iolani, the biggest famous alumni that went there was Sun Yat-sen, who became the first president of the Chinese Republic after the overthrow of the monarchy in China. Anyway, being there, I did band and I was in the choir. And then, the schools always had yearly musical, and they were doing Guys and Dolls at the time. And because we were a boys' school, the girls were from Punahou and from the sister school, all-girls school called St. Andrew's Priory. And she said, would you like to be in the chorus? Because someone dropped out. And it's sort of like a back-end way, because I didn't think, I was too shy to audition. I didn't, but all of a sudden being just allowed in and being in the chorus, it was fun. It was like a totally different world. It was exciting, the whole thing. Everybody is bound together by theater and making music, entertaining. And whereas I found myself being uncoordinated on the athletic field, for some reason I was coordinated. I could do preliminary dance numbers and everything, and found like at home to be on that stage. So from 14 to when I graduated from Iolani, I was in the drama program. Well, did the drama shows, and then also branched out and wound up doing University of Hawaii Drama Theater lab productions. Were getting cast with a grad student who had a project called She Stoops to Conquer. And so further meeting other kids who love theater and everything. And her name was Sue Berger, and she eventually wound up marrying Barry Corbin, who's most famous for being the mayor on Northern Exposure.
Okay,
character
sure.
actor. Yeah. So, and then, interestingly enough, flash forward years later, I'm back at my 50th high school reunion last year, June. And one of the headmaster's assistant was my choir teacher, Helen No. Lee's daughter. And I learned that she was still alive and thriving. And I just said, I got to tell you, if it wasn't for your mom, she basically mentored me because she opened a door into this new world. And then my year of graduation in '66, that was the year that there was a fellow named Herb Rogers brought professional summer stock to Honolulu. And they were housed at what's at that time was called I think it was the Honolulu Concert Hall, which is now the Neil Blaisdell Concert Hall. And it was like this large 2,500, 3,000 seat auditorium where beautiful theater. I wound up auditioning for The King and I, that was starring Ann Blythe, and I got a character actor named Joel Fabiani, and I wound up getting cast, and it was a taste, and I wound up being invited to be like an apprentice for the remaining shows. There were like maybe 3 more shows following The King and I, with like South Pacific that starred Howard Keel. And Howard Keel and I became friends, and I wound up going on stage for the last 2 performances, playing the part of Henry that opens up the show with Dites-moi, with the kids. And then, of course, by then I had been accepted to Northwestern University Theater Program, the fall of '66.
All right, so let me jump in there actually, because there's a number of things I want to ask about. I mean, well, first, Howard Keel, he was a big deal in terms of movie musicals.
Yeah,
for a number of years. And so, what was it like, working with somebody who was at that level?
People forget that at a certain point, even after those golden years of the musicals at MGM, his appeal was not that great at the business at the time. It was almost as if that era had gone by, but he was working by doing summer stock tours of different musicals. He hadn't lost his voice or anything, and he was a terrific presence. So, interestingly enough, it's TV that gave Howard a second shot at prominence with Dallas.
Okay, right.
So you never know where it's that kind of nature of our business. If you stick in it long enough, there's always a comeback of some sort. Within one's journey, you have touchstones and touch points, and then there's interconnectedness. You don't know it at the time,
of course,
but from a higher altitude, and of course time. If you're lucky enough to have an extended tour of duty, so to speak, you wind up saying, "Wow, the people that come in, there is truly a 6 degrees of separation, some sort of or another." It's a fascinating thing, and I still look at it that when I take a pause, I'm going, I am doing, and I'm being allowed to do what I've always dreamt of doing when I was a kid, and I still get to do it. This February will be my 45th year in front of the camera, and so it's like, I was in Toronto just a week ago doing a guest star on Designated Survivor, the Kiefer Sutherland show on ABC, and I was going, how about that? Statistically, a lot of people in my bracket, they're kind of wound down a lot of times,
Oh, sure.
But the next week, it turned out that the Christmas episode of NCIS I guested on wound up being repeated. So I'm going, well, there you go. You never can plan these things, and it's like all of a sudden it's there. And it's just one of those moments where you go, wow, how grateful it is to be still doing it, and to have I think it's very important that you be guided by a sense, not of resentment, but of a positive energy force, or the way you outlook on life, that you accept that what was past is past, and to embrace the future, and you embrace evolution and change, because it is going. And if you don't do it, then you're going to be left behind in the dust. Moaning the fact that, gosh, we don't have 78 vinyl anymore, or 33 RPM, 33 and a third RPM vinyl. Or, there still exists, but those are for a very niche audience, or it's sort of like the difference between Betamax and VHS.
Right.
And it's still happening, man.
So one of the things I feel when I am lucky enough to visit Hawaii is how removed it is from the rest of the U.S. I mean, kind of from the rest of the world too, but certainly from the U.S. And that's both can be really nice that you feel like you're just completely away from everything. But, as a kid there growing up, you watch these movies and it seems like a good idea. But did you ever feel like it was so removed to, get over to, the mainland? And I mean, how did you decide on Northwestern? How did that come about? And did your parents, were they supportive of all that?
Well, first of all, I didn't want to interrupt you, but it is a subliminal thing because you just said, how did you feel being removed from the U.S.? We were part of the U.S. as a territory, and we are part of the U.S. as a state. But the state of mind is if we're, at that time, like we were a foreign country,
Sure.
So it is. So for growing up, it was always one of those things you had to correct people. Say, no. It's the mainland. We're separated from the mainland and not from the U.S. We are the U.S.
Yeah, thank you. You're right. It is an important distinction.
So at that time, the seasons used to be divided because at that time Hawaii was still basically agrarian economy. Sugarcane and pineapples, and there are sugarcane plantations, pineapple plantations, almost on all the islands, with canneries and processing plants, etc. And but during those days, the seasons were also divided. In the summertime, it was called the co-ed season because all these girls, co-eds from the mainland, would want to take summer classes at the University of Hawaii. Not really summer classes. You show up or you register, but most of the time you're surfing, night clubbing, and spending time at the beach. And so every summer there would be a whole influx of tourists. Then in the fall, it would be called the carriage trade because it was so expensive to come to Hawaii. Only those that were well off or could afford would be able to either take the cruise line or the plane over to the islands. I think what changed it all was, interestingly enough, Hawaii 5-0 back in '66. All of a sudden, it was, bam, one of the most popular programs on '66, I think, on CBS. I mean, I think it lasted 11 years, 11 seasons, but it just opened the world's eyes to Hawaii. And the tourist industry all of a sudden just, boom, started to grow tremendously. And people wanted to go there. I mean, in fact, if you were a crew member on 5-0, you had the best opportunity to buy condos at the time. A lot of those crew guys wound up buying maybe 5 or 6 condos.
Wow.
Because it was, it was all affordable, and it was at the same time all being developed by, like, there was a big contractor and developer named Henry J. Kaiser who loved the color pink. So all his construction equipment, Caterpillar trailer, cranes and everything were painted pink. He really developed like Waikiki, where the Hilton Hawaiian Village is now. That used to be the original Hawaiian Village with the lagoons and everything like that. That whole concept was Kaiser. And growing up in Hawaii when I did in the 50s and the 60s, there were constant tensions going on. One of identity and being recognized. That's one, as an American or as part of the United States. 2, the fact that we're there as one of the front lines of the national defense in the national interest of security. And then an economic awareness of where you stand. And, Hawaii was one of the first states where, because of the economics, most married couples worked to support the family so that they could exist. And it exists today. Even before that whole idea had permeated society in the mainland, the continental United States, which a lot of people now, it's a matter of fact, right?
Sure.
Both husband and wife has a job and everything like that. And it still hasn't changed that. I mean, even though my mother was a school teacher and I went to public school from kindergarten to 6th grade, anything above 6th grade was a challenge in the academic arena. So that's why I wound up going to Iolani. Without the education, you can't better yourself. I might have been a weird kid. I think I was older before my time in a way. My thoughts weren't about kicking back and, hey, what's the latest style? And where people were listening to rock and roll music, I was listening to big band and Glenn Miller, the Dorsey brothers, Benny Goodman, and then jazz. So, and then at Iolani, being in the band, we had at that time we had this groovy music teacher, a guy named John Swan, Canadian, who would play first trumpet in the symphony, and then on the weekends have jammed with all the jazz players that would come in for either the industrial shows or playing in the nightclubs. Nightclubs were really big in Hawaii at that time in the 60s. I mean, I can remember on the grounds of our school, Iolani, it was also a former radio station, so it was all set up. But because it was a former radio station, it worked well for the band to be in there because we have kind of soundproof. And on the weekends, you'd have jam sessions with all these terrific jazz players from all over the country. And it was very exotic, right? And very kind of, wow, hey, let's go over and listen to the music, to hear that boom, and 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden this big band music was coming out. And also with the different characters where a couple of guys are smoking or have a bottle of 7-Up, which is not really 7-Up.
Right.
So it was like, wow, this is like exciting, right? It's like, it's so grown up in a way. We were so far out. I mean, the first concert I ever went to, I still remember, was the Kingston Trio.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Sure.
And that was real big at the time in the 65, 63. It was very short. The folk music movement was very big. And then, of course, then came Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys and everything like that. And sort of like when the Beatles first poked in, it was like, who are those people? No, that's not real music, you know. But, of course, that changed real quickly. The cool thing about it is that years later, was it 1985? I wound up getting cast in a movie, but the exciting thing was it was a handmade film, which was George Harrison of the Beatles, his film company. We're in Hong Kong and on location on the beach, and there's this guy coming up to me. He's going, "Hello, Clyde, you're very funny. The dailies are great." And it's George Harrison. And I'm going, wow, hey, thank you, George. But, you know, I grew up with your music and, you know, and you oh, yeah, there was another time, wasn't it? Now we got to move on with our lives, don't we? And he was the most down-to-earth guy. Well, I'm playing the music. I'm writing the music. I hope Madonna sings it. She never did. But in his movies, he always has like a small role. And in Shanghai Surprise, he was the guitar player in the hotel band. In a couple of the shots. And I thought, isn't this cool you wind up working with one of the legends of the music business that transcended the decades, you know, and shooting this film in Hong Kong and London. And in between that, I wind up getting cast in a terrific role that was written for me because I used to do a lot of imitations, and John Wayne used to be a fun thing to do. You know, well, I tell you, partner, how are you? And on Magnum, in between shots, you're going, well, we're got to burn some film because the sun's a sitting and the Black Tower is not going to be too happy. And one of the exec producers heard about that and created this role of a Japanese detective that spoke like John Wayne that drove Magnum nuts. It was created, and I was able to do both the film and the episode, which ironically was also directed by Leo Penn, who was Sean Penn's father. So it's all these, like, I'm telling you, it's like my career has been filled with all these coincidences or synchronistic elements that it's almost magical if I think about it.
Well, so Clyde, I'm curious. So, what did you take away from your time in Chicago? I mean, you studied theater at Northwestern, but you know, Chicago's obviously a great, lively arts and cultural city. So, what did you kind of take from your time there?
Well, you got to remember though, it's the times, right? And so,
sure.
From '66 to '70, Chicago was not the cultural center. I mean, there was theater life there. But it's not the active cultural theater life that had developed that is there presently. I mean, the big thing in Chicago at the time was Second City and maybe the Goodman Theater. And what was active theater with all these touring shows that played the big houses and everything. So that was before there was Steppenwolf and Looking Glass and all these other playhouses and ensembles. At Northwestern in '66, it still had the reputation with Elvina Krauss, who was the famed head of the school that was a touchstone for many successful people, from Charlton Heston to Anne Margaret to Warren Beatty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was interesting. I had applied. Boston University had a good theater program. Northwestern, Denison University, where Hal Holbrook and John Davidson went, who was a singer at that time. So the person that was going to conduct, and Carnegie Tech, before it became Carnegie Mellon, had a great theater program. But at that time, it was financially impossible to fly out to Pittsburgh, for example, to audition for their program. And that my parents were so practical that ain't happening. And I wound up being accepted to Denison University's theater department and Northwestern. Boston, on the other hand, there was another gal from Punahou and I were going to audition, but they assigned it to a local professor in theater in Honolulu who we didn't much care for. So we both said, no, we respectfully declined. They weren't too happy about that. But, I mean, I went, it was like you must understand, 1966 was that kind of a pivot point when it was still, when you went to college, there was that orientation week, you went through fraternity rush, and especially at prep school you got that list of what every gentleman should know when he goes to school. His wardrobe. 1, he must have a 3-piece suit. 2, a blazer, gray slacks. 3, a spring coat. The whole list of 3 blue shirts, 3 white shirts, 2 ties, regimental, etc. And then flash forward, you went to 1967. All of a sudden, it was like combat jackets, jeans, and beards. So it was like complete flip of a cultural thing. So it was, that year was that interesting pivot last year of, quote, the innocence of it all. And so I was very excited to be part of that program, and I thought I was hot shit because I had spent that summer in, quotation, professional summer stock until there was 125 kids in my introduction to theater class. And you meet people who were like apprentices at Totem Pole Theater in Pennsylvania, Algonquin Playhouse in Maine, Stowe, Vermont, Massachusetts, and you're going, these kids spent years interning the summers, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, you kind of get a reality check. And another big reality check was, I can't, probably in the fall or early winter, the theater professor, I forget the name now, but cornered me and said, you want to be an actor? Why? There's only Tea House of the August Moon and the King and I. How could you possibly think about making a living?
Wow.
It crushed me. I mean, I couldn't respond. I was like shocked, just as your reaction is shocked.
Yeah.
I didn't say it to anybody. I couldn't say it to anybody. Just internalized it.
Right, but to think of someone, who is kind of in a supportive, or supposed to be in a supportive position saying this to you. Yeah.
And the thing is, though, things happen for a certain reason. And it's like, when you think about it, it's maybe, quote, challenges. And what do you do to deal with the challenge? Do you let the challenge defeat you? Are you thus inspired then to go forward? And at the time, I didn't understand or know, have in my grasp the words perseverance, and the other word is resilience. But I knew that when I went back to Hawaii, it's sort of like, well, safe refuge, but then, of course, you have to have a summer job. And then the summer job I got through my uncle was in the night shift at Primo Beer, which was big at the time, at the brewery. And the night shift from like 4 in the afternoon to 12 midnight. And then sometimes a graveyard shift from 12 midnight to 8 where you had to clean it up. And here I am with all the blue-collar guys who are just doing this job. It was a good-paying job at that time, because it was like $3.75 an hour when the cannery was paying $1 an hour. So it was a lot of money. But here's this kid reading Lord of the Rings, and all these, hey, what you reading, kid? It's a thing called Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. What's it about? Well, these elves and little creatures called hobbits. And it was like, I think I don't want to be in this world. So I thought, I formulated, I guess, if I'm going to be considered an actor when I do it, I'm going to have to work and be 10 times better than a white actor to get noticed. And so I approached the sophomore year going back, auditioning for directing scenes, studio theater, children's theater, of course the main stage productions, which were 2 times a quarter. And flash forward, by the time the next 3 years I graduated from Northwestern, the theater department program, half the department cast me in the shows, the University Productions. The other half didn't cast me, but would hold me as an exemplar of a working actor within the department. And during those 3 years, I spent a summer stock time in Grand Lake, Colorado, the Troupe of American College Players, who did 4 shows in repertory. The following year, I was a stage manager, performer in an inaugural summer stock company in Michigan City, Indiana, called the Canterbury Playhouse, which survived for several decades. And 1970, the graduation year, I went to Aspen, Colorado, in the Theater Institute there at the time. And following that work in Aspen, Colorado, there was no going back to. I had also been accepted as a grad program at Northwestern, but I thought, do I really want to go back? And at that time, too, the U.S. government wanted me to be in the Army, and it took me a while, but I was able to get another deferment, so I didn't have to go into the Army. But at any rate, I was back in Hawaii that, say, August or whatever, and here's the thing that was like a splash of cold water in your face. Here you spend 4 years in college, and you have your folks going, so what do you want to do with your life? Why don't you get a job? And why don't you go work at the Hilton Hawaiian Village as a bellboy? I went, okay. I went to interview, and at that time I had a mustache, and the head guy looked at me and said, you got to shave it off. I said, what? And I went, I don't think so. And then it just so happened that someone I knew was starting this program of singing waiters. The concept was you're singing waiters and waitresses, and you would also entertain by doing songs from the gay 90s, the 1890s to the 1900s in Aspen, Colorado, at the old Hotel Jerome. And so I said, I'm there. And at the same time, I had auditioned for a radio station in Honolulu. And just as I left, the call came in. No, after I left, a week later, the call came in if I was interested in a job. It was too late. But at the same time, I was also doing a show at the University of Hawaii Theater Department that the head, Glenn Cannon, I had auditioned, and he'd cast me. It was Paul Winfield playing Coriolanus, and Cyril Cusack was also in it, who was a famous British character actor. And after a couple of weeks, though, the Aspen thing came, so I had to leave the show. But so I wound up in Aspen, Colorado. And, of course, the U.S. Army was after me, and I wound up getting out of that commitment and getting a permanent 1Y status. And then when the show closed in Aspen, it was like the first one of those economic slumps in the tourism industry. I wound up in L.A. in February of 1971 with the thinking was, at that time, knowing New York at the time was known as the mean streets. I mean, it looked like midnight cowboy time when it was really harsh. And I said, well, if I'm going to starve, I might as well go someplace warmer where at least I can see the Pacific Ocean, which was California and L.A. And for the longest time, I went, everybody I knew from school went to New York, did touring companies, got on Broadway, blah, blah, blah. But then what I didn't know is everybody went, oh, look at Clyde. He was so brave. He went out to Hollywood. But the interesting thing, the things happen is that wound up in 71, there was a theater company called the Inner City Repertory Company, which was a multicultural, multiracial theater company that was set up to cast with diversity in mind, because at that time that wasn't happening. And I got my equity card there, being a replacement in a production of Street Scene. And there I met a woman named Sumi Haru, who was an actress, who said, "Have you heard of Mako?" And I said, "Yeah, he was one of the first Asian Americans who was nominated for a Best Supporting Role for an Oscar in The Sand Pebbles. He was dynamic. And he started a theater called the East West Players." So she invited me down. Mako wasn't there at the time. He was in Japan. Interestingly, because of his being nominated, he got a little cred, and he was one of those artists that would put the money that he made into the passion projects that he had and developed. And he was in Japan. He gained the rights for a movie called The Silence, based on the book about Christian missionaries in Nagasaki around the 1600s or the 17th century, which, interestingly enough, was done by Martin Scorsese lately. I think it kind of died. It didn't reach any kind of wide success, as did Mako's back in the 70s. But I said, I visited the theater company. It was very small and tiny, and it wasn't my cup of tea. I think I still didn't want to identify myself as, quote, Asian, and I felt like I'm going to be breaking the barriers myself. And, when you have those kind of ideals, sometimes it takes a little hitting the brick wall and the dose of reality of saying, sometimes perhaps it's maybe a kind of Don Quixote kind of movement or choice. Then in 1972, there was a production of The Gold Watch, which was a play by a Japanese-American playwright, interestingly enough, from Chicago, named Momoko Iko, called The Gold Watch, and Mako was cast as a lead. This was at the Inner City Cultural Center. Nobu McCarthy, who had some ingenue success in films, was the mother. I was cast as the supporting character. And that's when I first met Mako. And then Mako said later, he said, like, "Who is this kid that Jack Jackson, the artistic director, was touting," which was me. But we got along very well almost immediately, because I was at that time maybe one of two Asian American actors in LA that had formal training of some sort. Myself with Northwestern, and then Summer Stock, and then there was another fellow from Hawaii, interestingly named Ernest Harada, who was a graduate of Lambda and studied with Etienne Decroix in Paris, who was Marcel Marceau's teacher as well. In a way, we were pitted as like kind of rivals at that time. But at East West Players, which was set up back in 1965 by Asian actors who wanted to demonstrate to the industry that the Asian actor was had more skill set than just playing laundrymen or coolies or peripheral roles that came along, by doing plays that were not necessarily written for Asians, like Chekhov or Ibsen. And so I would say that going to my time with East West Players was a important development arc for myself to rediscover my Asian roots and my Japanese roots. And we did a lot of plays based on Japanese shows, or kyogen, which is a form of no drama, the comedy element, and learning about the culture. But also, it was a way of also continuing to develop by studying. One of the coaches I wound up studying with was a fellow named Rick Edelstein, who was a TV director, writer, who at the time was also a close advisor to Barbra Streisand and her coach, and was very much method-oriented, motivation, utilizing your body and why you're doing this, and being bold enough to break some barriers that you may interiorly feel hesitant to do it because it might be embarrassing, sort of break through that embarrassment wall. It was not immediate. I mean, I had to work to be accepted. I had to work to be noticed. And all in all, it was good. It was just another challenge, because instead of being the victim, it's sort of like, why me? It's like, no, even though I didn't have a really formal way of understanding, like, again, the perseverance and resilience aspect of it all, I was practicing that without an awareness of the words themselves. So from that experience, it took me 2 years. I'd go out on auditions and everything, and at that time, maybe there were 10 people that would always be at these auditions for Asian, when it was called for Asian parts. And I wound up finally getting my first break being cast in Kung Fu in an episode called Sun and Cloud Shadow in 1973. And it was one of those things where I made sure I did my preparation. And back in those days, you had an appointment set up a week in advance. And then you would have to get the sides mailed to you. And then, but what taught me the discipline was to go an hour early to auditions. Be nice to the secretary. Says, geez, can I take a look at that script? Quickly scan it. Where does your scene fit in? Where does your character fit in? And start making choices of how you want to approach the character. And not just take, oh, this is what it is. And yeah, because many people would go, oh, this is just another guy who's a laundryman or whatever. No. Where does he fit in? Why was it written? And maybe you add your own story, your own backstory, your own motivations and everything. So the director I just auditioned for was a guy named Bob Butler. He was a very good TV director, film director, but he was very innovative. In fact, he, years later, wound up doing the pilot for Hill Street Blues, which was very innovative in the sense of handheld cameras, quick shots, herky-jerky, multiple camera angles, so that it was always kind of some movement. It wasn't staged. It wasn't 3 setups and move on to the next setup. There was an energy there. But he looked at me and he had me do it again and again, and then he cast me. And this role was an integral role, but I didn't have a billing, but it was thrilling because the first day of location was at the Fox Ranch. And to drive out there to the area, Fox Ranch is in the Santa Clarita Valley area, and today it's all developed with houses and everything, but at that time, it was the boonies. But the thrill of it all, and those days, you could wind up doing multiple roles in the arc of a series. And for Kung Fu, that lasted 3 years, I wound up being cast 4 projects, 1 2-hour one, and 3 episodic. One was also, my second episode for Kung Fu was called The Arrogant Dragon, and I remember going in there and auditioning for a lesser role, a co-star role, and the producer saw me and says, oh, you're the guy I've been talking about. Here, no, don't read this one, read this one. And it became my first guest star role. And that's when I was exposed to a director whose name escapes me now. I'm sad to say I'm at that age range, but he would we had to connect, and he would say, as we're setting up, he said, no, Clyde, take a look through the camera lens. I'm going to have the stand-in do the action I'm going to shoot, and it's through the back of the cabinet, so you can see. This is what I'm seeing. So this is what. Don't worry about it. This is where the camera is going to be focused. And what it was I was beginning to have a tutorial on. It was almost like having a postgraduate course in filmmaking and film acting, which was terrific. And I wound up working with this director another episode, 2-hour episodes that we did called Blood of the Dragon, where I had 2 roles. One is a 100-year-old Tibetan Lama, and the other as this mystic warrior, evil person out to get Kwai Chang Caine, and had this force and power that would come through my power energy source by rolling my eyes up into my head. And like at one point in the audition, he says, "Can you do that?" And I did. And he said, he just handed me the script. He said, "I'll see you in a week." And I wound up working with him in other projects. His father, he was the son of a famous Hollywood director who directed, I believe, The King and I, and was one of the staff directors at 20th Century Fox. But we just, got along very well. And I can't seem, Richard Lang, that's his name, Richard Lang. And Walter Lang was his dad. And Richard there was a kind of, it was like one of the first guys to just look at me and says, I'm welcomed and accepted, and you're a good actor. And if he could find a place for me, he would find a place for me. Those were the days when there was no kind of quota or diversity movement to impel somebody to cast you. It was one of those slow days where the word went out, says, just find me good actors. So a casting director would have me come out, and there would be a black actor, a Hispanic actor, one of each, so to speak. And I would wind up getting cast. And that's how I wound up breaking through the barriers in a way and getting known, as well as I believe, and those were the days too in LA when equity waiver 99 house seat shows were very important, because during those days, casting directors, writers, producers, directors did go to the little theaters to look for talent, did go upon recommendation from a casting director, etc., to go down to East West Players and catch this guy. He's good. And that's how, it was almost like that whole feeling that you do the work, you keep trudging along that road of happy destiny, and you gain the experience, it's just practice, 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 right? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And there's still another time I went to the offices of Kung Fu the Production on Warner Brothers, and as I walked in, the head casting person went, there you are. He jumped out of his seat. He said, follow me. He took me down the hall, opened the door, and said to another exec producer, this is the guy I'm talking about. He can talk. Because at that time, certain ethnic actors would be cast because of the look. And they'd fill in the dialogue later in ADR, dialogue replacement, and loop him completely. But I was considered this, he's trained. He can speak. And it really did, that training really has always aided me, because it's about making choices. And at that time, certain, like, for example, vocal directors of TV animated shows would say, hey, I heard this guy. Can you come in and read for this? And, like, would start off as a small role, and you prove yourself, and then subsequently you get called in for another show and this and that. And by the way, you're playing the tailor, and you're going to do some walla, and can you do a couple of lines on this other character, where you got a chance to not be the same, but create a different kind of character with the dialogue and everything. It could be a non-Asian character as well. So there was a time where that's how my pathway in to doing voiceover work in animated shows started as well. I'd say to this day, I've worked almost every contract that SAG-AFTRA has, except for perhaps maybe a dance contract or a singer's contract. Because even industrials, they're not called co-eds now. But industrials, I've done industrials where you have to do how to install the PVC-T 9.3 zip, and what the consequences are if you do not follow A, B, C, D, or E. And as boring as that, but it's all communicating, right? All those things is many of the times is just given the opportunity and jumping in and having the courage enough to go, okay, let me do it. If I make a mistake, I'll be not dinged, but I'll just be corrected. Because it's the hardest thing in our business, because what it is, the element is, you're always going to be rejected. We're in a system where it's built in. Rejection is part and parcel of the daily regimen. And it takes a long time to finally set it aside going, I'm going to prep to do this thing, and I'll do the audition, but the guarantee is I'm not going to get that job. The guarantee is I get a chance to show my wares, to show what I can do. And I've learned through the years to have this analogy, and I use it like in regards to, say, a wide receiver like Jerry Rice for the 49ers, who is tremendously talented, effective, had the hardest training regimen, and which allowed him to play into his early 40s. That even the younger guys, the hotshots, would work out with him and couldn't keep up with him. Because it's the willingness to keep your body, your instrument, your voice, your body movements, your mental acuity in shape so that, for example, if you're cut by a team, you have to try out to another team. Therefore, you have to study their playbook and get familiar with their run patterns, their routines. And you may be picked up, you may not. You may have to go try out for another team, or they'll put you in the taxi squad or the development squad and then bring you up, sort of like in the Major League Baseball, in the farm league, farm you out, AAA, AA, single A, all that kind of stuff, to work out the kinks and then brought up to the big show. And then also, early on in my career, it was pointed out to me when it came to actors and acting, it's like we're the biggest bullshit business in a way, because many of us are undisciplined. If you want to be a concert violinist, a concert pianist, a ballet dancer, one, you have to know your instrument, the piano. You have to know the violin. You have to practice, practice, practice. You have to be able to sight read. You have to understand what are the pieces that you need to demonstrate. If you're a ballet dancer or you're a dancer, you have to keep working so that your skill set of being always in shape when presented with a routine to be able to do that. When you look at chorus line, dance 10, look 3, you have to be able to follow the pattern, pick it up in less than a minute, so that you can then make it your move so that you finally get to the final callback, and perhaps get picked to be just in the chorus. For example, if you look at chorus line, it's not about being the star; it's about just being into the chorus to get work. So I think what's missing today is that kind of understanding and the discipline. Look, there's a lot of opportunities, right? The young people, you can be on YouTube, you can have your subscribers on YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, and sponsors may come to you. Would you put this can of Coke in your next video or whatever? And that's fine. God bless. You're making a business. You earning a living. However, you may just be relegated in that one little niche. And if you want to break out, you can't, because you're only known for that. If you break out into another, you will lose your subscribers. That fear, it hasn't changed. It's just gone on more high tech. But if you want to be that actor, that's in a way why people will say, Jesus, why are all these actors from the UK or Australia or New Zealand, they seem to be coming in? And because in their system, I remember working on Shanghai Surprise, working with a lot of Brit actors, and we had a conversation one time. He says, "Oh dear boy, it could be stage, it could be television, it could be a commercial, it could be a movie, but it's acting, dear boy. That's what we do. We act." And I went, "Oh yeah," because at that time, oh no, I only do films, or I only do stage, or I only do Broadway. Oh no, I don't do TV. And then, no, I don't do commercials. No, I don't do voiceovers. So as a result, everything was so niche-oriented, right? But that now, today, in today's marketplace, you have to be able to do everything. And it is not a come down to do television. Because now the most creative element in our business is TV shows. There are 500 TV shows being produced every year the past couple of years. Whereas feature work has kind of shrunk down to basically franchises or big tentpoles. And then the interesting work is like independent films and everything, but that's challenged financially, remuneration-wise, to do those things. I mean, the star of Boys Don't Cry won the Academy Award down the road, but during that point, she couldn't get a prescription filled because she hadn't qualified for the health plan because she didn't make enough money. That's how kind of weird and kind of surreal the business can be. It's not always the glitterati and paparazzi, so to speak, on the red carpet, And these days the challenges are such that now it's sort of like, hey, can you come in this afternoon? What? Oh, here's the sides. Or can you self-shoot your scene? And when you self-shoot a scene, what you're doing is you're doing the work of the casting assistant, you're doing the work of the camera operator, putting at least rudimentary light, providing background so that it's, palatable. And on top of everything, you can't just look at your script. You have to at least have some semblance of understanding what the character is so that they can see you looking at the camera. It's a good training, by the way, no doubt, to get that ease in front of the camera. It's when you look at people doing their Facebook chats and everything, it's like, seems seamless, but it'll help if you're a presenter, for example. But at the same time, when you're trying to concentrate on a role or character that you're going to do in less than 24 hours, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, So, and also it's sort of like all those elements. It's almost like you have to learn how to be the juggler, and I'll do everything kind of thing. But at the same time, what is the most important thing is to be able to book the job based on what? Your skill set. And a lot of times it's a learning thing. It's like the last audition I did where it was self-shot. I finally just said, okay, there are services, so I'll pay the $40 for the half hour, 20 minutes of shooting time, 10 minutes of editing, and then they'll upload everything and email it to your representatives. But what was a good learning thing was that how am I possibly going to do this scene where all the characters just interspersed in 5 pages of dialogue? Well, you learn to edit it, right? And then you get to the point where you give your edited copy of what you want to audition to the guy that's running the camera, and so basically you're editing it down to like a different kind of performance, so almost like a monologue in a way, and you're reacting to the other things, and therefore you do it that way. It aids you by doing the edit work and everything to make the choices that you need to make, so that when you're finally shooting that scene for the self-quote, air quotes, self-tape, you've already directed it in your head, and whether you get picked or not, at least you were there showing your effort and getting a chance to practice your skill set and demonstrate your skill set. I think that's one of the most important things I've learned is looking at auditions and meetings not as warfare, but as an opportunity to demonstrate your skill set and what you can do, not about booking it. I remember a few years ago, there was a pilot being cast for NBC called REM. Then it was really renamed Awake with Jason Isaacs. And it was written and created by a showrunner who did a very good showrunner. I forget his name right now. But I did a lot of work in prepping for it. And so when I go into an audition, the white pages of the scene are like chock-a-block with red cross marks added, maybe incidental dialogue to toss in if I'm allowed to have connectedness and everything. And by doing that process, you do that prep work. And I remember going into the Fox lot, 20th Century Fox lot, and there were a couple of younger actors famous for certain big movie types. And one guy was reading People magazine, and his sides were on the table in front of him, pristine white. And I went, yeah, stay out of that inventorying thing. Just concentrate on what you want to do. And it was a long wait, and so I'll go in, and I did also part of the preliminary work to Kyle Kalin, that's his name, the showrunner. You go, hey, that was one of the quickest, highly reviewed shows, and it lasted 2 episodes, huh? And you go, yeah, and this and that, because it's an opportunity for that first 20 seconds or whatever to connect to the creators. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But at least when you're able to have a little conversation, it's implicit that you've done some of your footwork and research. So anyway, we start to do the audition, and then Jason Isaacs was really into it. And at one point, he says, well, do it again. And a lot of times, the first pass, I'll do it basically slower. It's almost like editorializing anyway, mentally saying this is going to be the take. They can cut to it. And if there's interest on the part of the producer or the director in that room, he'll say, hey, I like that, but let's do it again, but tighten it up. So one, you had a practice run or rehearsal at it, get you relaxed within that room. And also, never be afraid to just go in maybe second or third sentence if there's a screw up, not work through it, but go, oh, geez, I'm sorry. Do you mind if we start over again? It says to them, he's confident enough to be able to recognize he made a mistake, and he's going to be honest about that, and he's not going to try to fake it through. And they'll go, 9 times out of 10, they go, yeah, fine, sure, no problem. And so you get to do it again. And then at one point, Jason said, hey, can we do the other scene? So anyway, it was one very, very collaborative, most enjoyable auditions I've had. And I left it, and the whole room was filled up. And then as I was walking in the parking lot, there was a Hispanic actor who came up laughing. He says, dude, you freaked out a lot of people. I said, what do you mean? You were in there for 25 minutes, man. People are going in for 1 minute, 2 minutes. You were there for 25 minutes. And I went, oh, really? And I felt really good about it. But I didn't book because what I learned at the time we were having that session, NBC was finalizing the deal with B.D. Wong to play that psychiatrist. So, it was one of those things. And the point was, it was not a fool's errand. It actually, to me, I took the value of it was it demonstrated my intent and my regimen of doing it was validated because for that moment, I spent a long time with the creators, and that's in the opportunity you sell yourself. They have no control over what the network wants, but at least they were actively taking you into consideration. So, and that's what's exciting about even being in my 45th year in this business in front of the camera. That's what keeps it alive and fresh, is you go in not like, oh God, we're going to have to do another 25, that kind of a thing, that kind of attitude, or the other attitude is, Christ, they should know what I can do. Why don't they see my reel? Why don't they do this and that? It's like, no, sometimes what you do, and sometimes not everything you practice or anticipate is received. You're going to have some cold fish, and you go, thank you very much, and you move on. But keep the attitude down, unless, say, you're like Shelley Winters, who was years ago, the famous story is she was called in to audition, and people went, they called in Shelley Winters? But she went. And she went into the room and was down a long table, and she gets to the end of the table and all the people on both sides. She's carrying a shopping bag, and she puts the shopping bag down, and she reaches down and puts an Oscar from that bag there. Then from another bag, she takes and picks up another Oscar, puts it on the table, looks at them and go, okay, are we done? Takes the Oscars and puts them back in and walks back out. That was the way she dealt with it. It's like, at least she's Shelley Winters and she could do that, being a double Oscar winner.
Right.
So it's all these different stories. It's for us to find your own story, what works for you, and not necessarily copy what somebody else did. Don't compare yourself to another person. Find your own true person and be comfortable and being accepting of what you bring to the table, which is a very, very challenging thing for many people to have. And a lot of times what happens is you wind up on the pride boat, and the pride boat usually sinks because it can't keep up. You got to be able to, sail that boat, whether it's going to be... No, actually, if you want to surf, here's my thing. You want to surf, you adapt to the boards that you're given. It could be the 8-foot redwood board from the old times, or the 6-foot gun, or the 3 or 4 foot new with 4, rudders underneath. But you still get to surf. The wave is still there. It's whether you can adapt to the different boards that are being used at the time. That's what I've learned. That's what I take about it.
Clyde, I'm curious, to jump back to when you did Midway. Here you are working with one of, you do the scene with arguably one of the biggest stars in the world, certainly in Japan, huge international star. And I don't want to mispronounce his name. So can you say the actor's name?
Toshiro Mifune.
Yes. So you're doing this scene with him, and he's done, Seven Samurai and Rashomon, and just a big star in Japan. And what did you take away from, either just observing how he worked, or, because this was one of the first films in your career, if not the first, right?
Actually, it was the second one, yeah.
Okay, so it's very early in your film career, and you're probably still discovering your technique and all that, and here's this guy who's been, just doing so much. What did you take away from that experience?
It was an interesting experience all around because we shot that in June of 1975. At the same time, I wound up being cast by John Cordy in an NBC MOW called Farewell to Manzanar, which dealt with the Japanese American intern camps that were put into the camps by the U.S. government. And it was based on a true story by Jeannie Wakatsuki, Farewell to Manzanar, which is a book that's taught in schools still to this day. And so, on the one hand, I'm playing the enemy that attacked Pearl Harbor and then attacked at Midway. And then a week later, I'm winding up doing the internment thing. But doing Midway was interesting because I was excited. I was Commander Watanabe, Admiral Yamamoto's aide, and Yamamoto was played by Mifune Toshiro. And one of the, arguably the John Wayne of Japanese film industry. Interestingly enough, he was an international star, but back in Japan, because of their kind of tight societal ways, he was considered like a sellout. It's very interesting, but no doubt though he was a force and a presence. And the opening of the movie is myself reporting to the Admiral that Doolittle's raiders bombed Japan, all these cities in Japan. This is April of 1942. And I kept getting these rewrites sent to me. All of a sudden, I got more dialogue that was originally written for him, to the point where he was left with maybe 3 lines. When? How? That's it. And I'm going, I don't think that camera's going to be on me. It's going to be on him, because he had such a presence that he didn't need all that dialogue. It was one of the first exposures to dealing with someone with that kind of charismatic presence that you don't see the work. You just see the character reacting, and it makes the scene work. I don't know how else to describe it. But it was such a wonderful, he was such a giving person as well. As we got on the set and met each other, he looked at my dress, my wardrobe, immediately took off the ceremonial dagger that he brought with him for his wardrobe and made sure he put it on myself, because the aide should have that ceremonial dagger with it, not necessarily the Admiral himself. And he took that kind of concern and look in doing a historical presence situation. And then in the course of the scenes, a lot of the scenes where I'm the one advising the staff, or this is the problem, here's this is what we have to do. And so he would just be looking and this and that. And interestingly enough, I did a lot of work in researching, trying to find the character of Watanabe. And I found him only in 2 books, just that one sentence, and his aide was Commander Watanabe, or another thing, and Watanabe. So I wound up saying, well, how do you fit the uniform? How do you live in this uniform? And I finally found a couple of books. One was called Samurai, based on the life of Saburo Sakai, who was Japan's foremost living ace with 81 kills that survived the war. But he never attained an officership. He was just like a warrant officer. And therein lied the tale about the regimented caste or class system within the Japanese military structure. And the fact that the Navy had a different ethos and culture than the Army. The Navy was more European and British-oriented and Dutch-oriented, because those were the advisors that established the Navy, versus the Army, which was more nationalistic and jingoistic and less disciplined, so to speak, less international, more nationalistic. And so there was also another book called Destroyer Captain by a Japanese captain based on the life of commanding destroyers in the Second World War. But what was much more important was the first part where he described going to their version of Annapolis, which was on an island called Itajima in Hiroshima Bay Harbor, where their naval academy was. And the rigidness and the culture was more of a corporal kind of way of punishment, where the captain could punch or slap or hit or kick the lieutenant, who could thus do it to the ensign, who could thus do it to the sergeant or to the chief petty officer, who could then all the way down to the lowly seaman. It was that kind of mentality, bullying and corporal punishment type of thing. And there's a reason why when you see these movies where there's highly disciplined, everybody's looking straight ahead as the person at the head of the table is speaking. Nobody has eye contact. They're just looking straight ahead to maintain that discipline. And interestingly enough, when we did those scenes where the big staff situations were, there were many actors who didn't even bother to do any kind of research about it. They just, they got to put on the uniform and they, quote, acted. And I thought, okay, that's a choice, not my choice. I'd rather do the research, do the work so that I know on the set that I can feel comfortable as that character and don't have to be quote, faking it, as a lot of these other guys are faking it. And then years later, I was doing a play at East West Players called Hokusai Sketchbooks about the life of the famous painter Hokusai in Japan, who from the age of 18 to 82. And in that play, I wind up aging, even stage makeup-wise. And I was the understudy. And for the longest time at East West Players, I would always be the understudy. And a lot of times it would be like, why am I the understudy? Aren't I the trained person and this and that? And I was understudying Mako, who was playing Hokusai. But then Mako booked a Chuck Norris film in San Francisco. And I had quit. I said, Mako, I can't do this anymore. Then I had a change of heart in 24 hours and saying, what are you doing? Talk to him again and say, you'll be the understudy. He kind of laughed. I said, what changed your mind? He says, no, I just got to do this thing. Of course, then next day was like, you're going to be going on. I said, what? Yeah, I booked this movie, so you're going to be opening the show in 2 weeks. I mean, holy shit. I'm going to have to, And I put in a lot of effort and everything, and to the point was, by the time we opened, I was a fully formed character, and I was still developing the character, so that when he would come down from San Francisco and have his own rehearsals, he would listen to what we had developed in the course of production and rehearsal, but go on his own path. And unbeknownst to me, a casting director for the movie The Challenge, a John Frankenheimer picture, had seen, 2 weeks before the show was to close, had seen the production. And at that time, there was an actor that was cast in this production called The Challenge with Toshiro Mifune and Scott Glenn, who had to drop out, so they needed someone to replace him. And so I got my agent call and says, how quickly can you get photos of the aging thing? So I quickly did the makeup and costume and had those photos done, and she sent them to Japan. And the next day after we closed, I was on a plane headed to Osaka and then Kyoto for something like supposedly 2 weeks. And the 2 weeks turned out to be the whole length of the feature shoot, about 3 months in Japan, working with Mifune. And basically doing that same kind of role in the sense of the exposition. What Sensei Yoshida said is this. And at that time, Mifune-san was very warm and welcoming. He remembered the whole thing, and he would always invite us to lunch with him as the American crew would go off and socialize, go off to find their own restaurant. And at the time, he was seeing this woman who was his girlfriend and then who was pregnant, and her name was Mika. And then years later, 5 years ago, that child that was there is now a grown woman and a TV personality. And I was asked to be interviewed by her for an NHK documentary show. So I brought a lot of the pictures of him and myself and this and that, and she was very thrilled. And then she said something very interesting. She said, my father used to always talk about you and how much you did and how much you were willing to help him when we worked together. And I thought, really? Oh, wow. I mean, that's kind of cool, because in this movie, the Challenge, we shot it in 1981 for CBS Films. He also, John, wanted as many of the veterans from the Seventh Samurai to also be involved. He got this actor Shimada, who was a leader in Seven Samurai, to play Mifune's father. Then the actor Inaba-san, who was this portly, jovial guy in the Seven Samurai, to be a character. And then Seiji Miyaguchi, who was the swordsman in the Seven Samurai, to be another character as well. So it was very thrilling. And then this is how the interconnectedness is. Years later, in 1992, I'm in Australia and Malaysia shooting a film called Paradise Road, where I replaced another actor that had fallen out. But in the course of the time, I'm playing a Japanese sergeant, a very mean guy. And then my technical director and dialogue coach, I was telling him this story about the Challenge and working with Seiji Miyaguchi. And then he stops me and says, I am Seiji Miyaguchi's son, Tomo Miyaguchi. So in the course of my career, I wind up working with the father. Years later, I wind up working with the son, who's a great, tremendous help in helping me craft and create this character that I played in Paradise Road, which was Bruce Beresford picture that starred Glenn Close, and it was Kate Blanchett's first film, Juliana Margulies, Frances McDormand, a whole litany, a powerhouse of female actresses based on this true story of women prisoners of war in Sumatra by the Japanese, who survived by forming a vocal orchestra. And my character was such that Bruce Beresford says, Clyde, yours is going to be the one that sees the eyes, because he starts off as a brute and winds up being a sympathetic figure. And in real life, in the war crimes trial, he was vouched for in his defense by many of the women who were his prisoners. But that didn't matter. He was still executed for war crimes, where the people that he followed orders from escaped that and wound up in government again. It's that nature of it, but I know I digress from this whole thing about starting with, you get me going. It's the interconnectedness, though, of the stories is part of that journey I keep talking to you about.
Yeah, it's just been phenomenal to hear about all the different twists and turns in your career.
I don't know if I'm following it. It's not chronological, and then I did this.
Right. It's a winding, circuitous, back and forth route through Clyde's career, but it's been really great. You're a great storyteller. It's Nathan here one more time. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to the show so you don't miss anything. And if you can take a minute to rate and review this in iTunes or wherever you find podcasts, that will help others find out about the show. I appreciate all comments, and thank you very much for doing that. Be sure to visit workingactorsjourney.com/podcast for the show notes and any links from today's episode. You can also follow the show at WA Journey on Twitter and Instagram. Feel free to connect and let us know what did you enjoy from the show. Don't forget to visit workingactorsjourney.com/audible for your free audiobook and 30-day trial from Audible. Thank you again to today's guest. I really appreciate and value all the people that contribute their time to making this show possible. I'm Nathan Agin, and thanks for listening.